this computer. Okay. All right. We're here for, I'm trying to remember the full title. I have all this stuff here. This is Political Comics That Spark Conversation. We're here with Nat Nichols. Did I get your name right?
It's okay. It's Nat, but it's got
Nat,
a lot of.
okay.
I got a lot of letters. We're good.
All right. Hold on one second. Okay, she's an editorial cartoonist for the Port Townsend Leader. She has a master's degree from, let's see, you have a master's degree in drawing from Royal Drawing School in London, and you're the author of Boats, Bears, and Bad Life Choices, The Race to Alaska. And this, we're the KC Zine Fest, and I have to give the little spiel. We're basically a collective of zinesters, writers, etc., and we're just working to build a DIY community in Kansas City and introduce people to zines and share all the wonderful things about zines. And we do ask you guys to follow the Safer Spaces policy. It's a little bit long, so I'm just gonna give you guys the link in the chat if you did want to look it over. It's basically no hate speech, no discrimination. We don't tolerate racism, sexism, etc. I think you guys can all follow that. And we also need to do, or would like to do, a land acknowledgement. And we are acknowledging that our festival inhabits land stolen from the Kansa, Osage, and Shawnee nations, the traditional guardians of the land on which we live, and that our nation was built on a legacy of chattel slavery, the brutal enslavement of Black people whose exploited labor created this nation's wealth. And we feel it's important to assert that Black lives matter. So now that those are kind of out of the way, I will let Nat go ahead and go, I guess, take it from here.
Great, thank you so much. I'll also start to say that I am currently coming to you from Sequim, which is on traditional S'Klallam land. And in fact, I am right on the border of the reservation. Cool. Okay, so first off, because I am in S'Klallam County and it is extremely rural Washington state, there may be moments in which my face pauses for your screens where it doesn't pause for everybody else. I don't have awesome internet out here, so I just want to start by thanking you for your patience. The way that I'm going to do this today is that I'm going to start out by, I have a whole bunch of slides and a lot of information, and I'm going to slow down and try and kind of talk you guys through my process and talk you through what's important about political comics for a local audience. And then from there, I'm going to have a good chunk of time at the end for people to pitch ideas or talk through their own experiences and ideas on what the kinds of comics they'd like to make. And I would love to be able to offer whatever help and insights I can to getting more information to you about how to pursue what you want to do. Great, so I am going to go ahead and swap over to share my screen. I know everybody's super bored of people on Zoom saying they don't know how to do anything, so I'm just going to do it like I do know how to do it. Okay, great. Hopefully this all works. Oh. Present. Ta-da! Okay, great. If my face is the primary thing you can see, it's probably not as interesting. You're going to want to swap things around to where you can see the shared screen instead. Great. Cool. So I am a political cartoonist for a local newspaper. The area that I live in is extremely small. We are a county with, I don't know, there's probably a readership of around 30,000. There is like 9,000 people in the town itself of Port Townsend where I live. I started out by, well, I've always been a professional artist for the last 10 years. And then a couple years ago, I got a completely wild hair to try and get myself onto the media team of this insane boat race called the Race to Alaska. And I pitched it to them, and I spent a month at sea following non-motorized boats on their way from Port Townsend to 850 miles north to Alaska. It's a race that has like carbon fiber racing yachts that are pitched against people in kayaks and stand-up paddle boards. And it's this super crazy, awesome thing. And I am terrified of the water. And I spent an entire month documenting it. And at the end of it, I had this great book that came from it. And the book kind of reminded me and showed me that the thing that's important to me is being able to create nonfiction comics that tell stories and can connect people to their subjects. So the first slide that I have up is one of my early comics. And it's really incredibly important to me because it did something that's really difficult to do. About a month after I had it published, I had a woman contact me and tell me that she hadn't thought through, she'd always been very strongly opposed to paying our city council members for anything, that she thought that our government, people who work for our government should be doing it for as little money as possible, and the government should always be as underfunded as possible because there's more important places to put money. And that the realization for her that there is no way to get representational government unless people could afford to take the time to be part of that government really changed the way that she saw her role as a citizen and how she could help support having a fair and diverse base. And that was the first thing that I did that I thought was a really big deal, to being able to change public minds and get something forward into the world in a way that I really wanted it to. So while I'm talking, if you want to take notes and think about things that are happening in your community that you would love to be able to engage with further, we'll go ahead and address it all at the end. So these extremely attractive people are our county commissioners. I don't know how it is where you're at right now, but currently in Washington State, every single public meeting is done via the internet. So you can tune into their Zoom calls, and you can listen to what they say. And from that, you're able to really learn a lot about what's happening in your community, which is, I feel like for me, been the first step. For me, the activism role and the information role comes first. And then it's my job as a cartoonist to be a human filter and become able to take the things that they're talking about, which are complex. That particular meeting was 3.5 hours long, and I just put it on in the background while I did other things. But whenever something interesting comes up, you like take notes and go, okay, cool, this is something interesting. And then it's my job to kind of follow up and distill that down into something easy for other people to understand. So that meeting brought forth, that was when we moved into the next phase of opening. And that meant that camping opened up in my community. And when camping opened up, they hadn't realized that that meant that they would be losing space for the homeless, which they've been having at the fairgrounds for camping. I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to read that, just because I love talking so much. It can be really hard for people to read at the same time. Okay, so these guys, these raccoons were having a conversation about the kind of mirrored what the city councilors were talking about. And for me, this was really important because it was a side note in a county commissioners meeting that was 3 hours long, that they're like, oh, we made a mistake and now we don't know what we're gonna do with our homeless population. Oh, well. And this has been a problem in the community that I live in for a while, where we don't know what we're going to do with our homeless population. We're a small tourist town, and we've already had a problem with deaths from people experiencing homelessness more than we have with Corona. We're currently at 71 Corona cases for our county, whereas we've had 2 people in the last 12 months die from complications around experiencing homelessness. So it can be really important to follow, to gather research and to spend time with really understanding what local politics is in order to be able to make things that really matter and to be able to bring things that matter to you to other people. Okay. I love this Utah Phillips quote: "The earth is not dying, it's being killed. And those people, the killing it, have names and addresses." It is really every single person that has something to do with something that's important to you, that's government related, is required to talk to you because you pay their paycheck. I'm going to talk a lot more about that with this comic here. So we're all aware of the fact that Breonna Taylor's killers have not been brought to justice. It can feel with national news like there isn't very much that we can do about it. I personally, I don't work as a national editorial cartoonist. I don't have any desire to. I see a lot of cartoonists want to get their start, especially right now, by drawing very funny photos or very funny illustrations of Trump and things that he says. But to me, that doesn't help with the conversation. What does help is that I wanted to know if no-knock warrants existed in my county. If somebody could just come into somebody else's home without announcing their presence and while being heavily armed, without showing that they're the police. And so I know that I work for a newspaper, and so I can use that a little bit to leverage, but it doesn't really matter because we all pay our taxes, and these people have to answer us. So I spent about an hour on the phone talking to different people in the county sheriff's office to get the answer that in Washington State, yes, you can have a no-knock warrant. And I had a really delightful conversation with officer one county over who was very like, you're right, there has to be accountability for this, but the accountability is that you elect us. You elect the sheriff and you elect the judges that issue the warrant. So as long as you're voting for people that you think are good people, then it's fine. I personally, when I voted for a judge last year, didn't know what I was voting for. So being able to turn this over to the public and say, hey, did you know that when you were voting for somebody, who had the ability to do this, is it's important, and it's a very big thing to be looking at. And I really encourage you to be thinking about that when you're creating comics or posters or zines or anything that you're making, is finding out what the things are that are important and being able to contact those people and finding a way to very clearly show what the dangers of some of the decisions we're unconsciously making are. Okay, so I had a big interview with a woman from a local domestic violence advocacy service. And these are just kind of the notes that I was taking while I was talking to her. I know that, so we're in the middle of talking about defunding the police in our community and what that looks like. And I know a lot of communities are talking about and thinking about the same thing. So in Jefferson County, the numbers are that we have way more domestic violence calls than we have any other kind of violent crime calls. Once again, I live in a rural area and I tackle rural news, but domestic violence is a big thing here. So I went to a domestic violence advocacy service to find out what they want. And these are the notes. She was brilliant. I'd spent like 2 hours talking to her and just took a whole bunch of notes. So the first process obviously is identifying what the thing you're interested in. And I've heard it said over and over that journalists or cartoonists or activists, we're essentially curious people. So starting out by like, what am I curious about in my community? Finding that person who can give you the answers, calling them, setting up an interview, and just letting them talk and take notes. From all of these kind of scrambled notes in shorthand, I'm able to go on to the next thing, where I am looking more at how things are going to be. Like, this is my layout essentially for creating a comic. Let's see, where am I at on this? So I knew already there's a little bit of visual. I think a lot of artists, when they do this process, which is called thumbnailing, they're a lot more visual than I am. I don't find the visual aspect necessarily that hard, but I struggle to get the wording on things right, because I feel like it's so important. So the best advice I can give on getting things down to where they're understandable is to do it on Post-it notes, and to do things about that size so you know how much room. And you can see in this that it's way too wordy. If I was just to turn that into a comic, it would not be particularly compelling to view. But it gets the things in there that are important. Most violent crimes are domestic violence related here. Our victim advocates, victims don't want to see police presence. It's going to be violent. You know, it's changing. It's beginning to take a shape of the narrative. And then the final chunk of it is how the comic actually turns out in the end. And I'll just give you a couple of seconds to read it. So it's a big process to distill a 1 hour conversation down to one comic. And to be perfectly fair, I got so much information from her that I ended up doing a series of 3 comics on this. And they were great. So you probably have noticed already, between the raccoons and the chickens, that I spend a lot of time working with animals. I love drawing chickens more than I love drawing anything else in the entire world. I would happily just draw chickens for the rest of my life if it would pay my bills. And sometimes it does pay my bills now. That's like kind of a cool part about my job. But mostly it's just like a thing that I heavily enjoy. However, in this case, I was allowing anonymity to my sources by using an animal instead of a person. I often use animals to have the hard conversations, because as soon as you put a human face on something, it can be really difficult not to accidentally imply things. You're implying things with how you draw people about their race, their class, and their general social standing. And sometimes I play with that, and that can be fun. I also do interview comics, and I didn't include an example in this, but interview comics, when I name my source, I always draw them as they are. And I always approve their dialogue with them, because I have to cut it down so much. It's not like in a newspaper article where I can take one direct quote and then write a whole bunch around it. I really have to be very, very precise with what they do. And I'm using their images. So to avoid having to go through that and to keep the points as clear as possible, I often will use animals. And I really like using chickens because they're really blank. They're really like, there's not a lot going on with the chicken. And it's easier to get my point out with them without having any extra points added. They don't have the kinds of expressions that dogs have. They're pretty simple, and it's really easy just to get these ideas going and to get my audience on understanding where I'm coming from without having anything extra. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, but I got myself into some interesting trouble with this. So my comic is called Gnat Attack, and the first 9 months of it, I often, almost always, will include, I'll draw myself to have as a model for my comics, because I live by myself, and it's easy for me to use myself as a model. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I am a very white and very normal looking human being. And I spent the first 9 months of Gnat Attack just drawing white people. And I ended up having to issue a public apology to my community, because that is not who we are, and that is not a reasonable way to be representing a community. And so I hope that that allows you guys to think a little bit about who's saying what in your comics. So tackling, figuring out what the question is and what you're really saying with your visuals when you're expressing that question. So I don't always tackle the hard subjects. I'm going to switch to the next slide. I'll give you a couple of seconds to read it, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. So not my hardest hitting political comic, but all of us are experiencing COVID, and every once in a while I like to like ease my foot off the accelerator, especially around police violence, and just have something up there that's going to be something that universally people can relate to, so that they will listen to me more when it comes time for me to really hit about defunding the police. So in this case, I worked with a poet for a couple of years called Damon Arundel, and he's actually going to be a featured writer in my next book that's coming out next year. And he is an amazing swimmer. He was considered for the Olympics, but he's Black. And the amount of time that he had to explain to people that, yes, I can swim, Black people can swim. And the poetry that he's written around that has really reminded me and shown me the importance of being able to let people have a moment with that and then be like, oh yeah, of course. So the fact that I don't ski, I don't want to ski. I have no great desire. It's very me in the big coat. I'm not going to be learning how to ski this winter. But I feel like a lot of people where I live in Washington State have very set ideas about what skiers look like. Who skis, what social bracket, what color, what, you know, who you are as a human as that. So if I can give them a second to be like, oh, that's weird, I don't know why she draw a Black skier, then my job is done. I've created at least one moment of conversation where we get to confront our inner racist. And that's really important in my job, even when I'm doing fluff pieces about how much I don't like being cold and don't want this winter and COVID-19 to happen at all. You don't have to draw to be an awesome conversationalist comic artist. This is Sarah Merks's work. I'll give it a second because it's so good. You should really enjoy it. So Sarah lives in Portland, and she's done all these really great comics, but she mostly writes scripts and lets other people draw them. I think that's great, but she's really big on the zine world, and she does really cool zines. And I actually think that this is about as good as a comic can get. Like, it's funny, it creates conversation, and she drew it perfectly. You don't have to be able to draw a human or a chicken or anything else to be able to get a really good point across and get a really good story happening. And actually, you know, I recommend checking out Sarah Merk's work if you haven't already. She has a zine pack that she sends out monthly, and she's just really wonderful. But she's been covering the riots in Portland also, and doing a really great job of it. And I think she can draw really well, actually. And it's always surprised me that she's chosen to go the hiring other artists route. But her work is brilliant, and I hope you have a chance to check her out. So there are other ways to be able to get the word out. This is kind of a cool thing. I was interviewing Mary Fleener, who is another editorial kind of alternative comic book artist. And she did this. So she was an activist first and a comic book artist second for some of the stuff she was doing. And for this, she started doing drawing posters and comics about this area in California where she lives, that they were talking about putting in a gigantic redevelopment for. And she posted up all of these posters, and then the city passed a post no bills ordinance. And so they tore down all of her work. So she took a second, read through the post no bills ordinance, and saw that lost pets were allowed to, last pet posters were still allowed to be up. So she rewrote it and wanted to get the word out to people in her area that this area was going to be torn apart for a redevelopment. I think it's important to think about what the subject you have, how you want to get it in front of people. I heavily recommend contacting your local newspaper and asking them if you can draw a comic for them. It's going to pay really, really badly, but it's most comics. So the reason why you get so many people who do national comics about Trump is that they can draw one comic and they can sell it to 50 newspapers, and it will they'll pay you $5 a comic. So if you do it for 50 newspapers, then you make a decent wage. I draw for one newspaper. I get paid $30 a comic, and that's way higher than I think most people would normally get. But if you're trying to find a platform for things that you think are important to say, the newspaper is kind of a cool option because you're able to hit outside of your demographic, outside of your personal demographic. I personally worry a lot about preaching to the choir. And so I try and figure out what the thing is that needs to be said and how I'm going to get it out to people. And some of that is just, you'll be looking at things within your community. And if you're somebody who creates zines and you want to create a zine comic about something that's important to you, finding what the angle is on that and what people in your community can do with that information is probably the most useful thing you can do. If you're trying to reach a new audience, doing something like a lost pet poster is actually a really brilliant way of getting information and getting a comic into the world, so that people that need that information that wouldn't normally be able to get it can get it. So Mary Fleener is a musician and a brilliant artist and has done a whole bunch of really cool stuff kind of beyond that. And this is a comic that she did for her local weekly newspaper, I think in 2013. So she's always had kind of an environmentalist bent, and it was through doing the Lost Dog posters that she was offered the space in the local weekly newspaper. And I do think that social media, where I post my comics, and Patreon, where my kind of harder core fan base is, are useful tools. But just the reaching out to other news sources and being able to push the conversation. So when I started at the Leader last year, they had a totally different news crew on than they have now, a different editor and a different reporting staff, and it was fairly left of center. And now it's been everybody's left, and it's all been people hired that are from out of town, and it's much more centerist. And to me, getting to be the voice that is pretty unedited, that gets to say and do the things that I feel like our community needs to hear, means that it's worthwhile for me to continue working for a paper that is really centerist. When the editor left and they hired the new editor, I heavily considered moving on and realized that I didn't want that. Even if I'm uncomfortable knowing that I'm pushing my coworkers' boundaries, it's important to my community that I'm able to hold things accountable that the other reporters and the editor don't have an interest in doing. Okay, that's my huge spiel on how I make comics and what's important and where to get them. I would love to open up for questions and kind of hear a little bit more about what is going on in your communities, and if you are thinking about doing anything cool with comics or zines or anything else.
It looked like we had a couple of questions in the chat. Do you want me to?
I'm so bad at multitasking. Hold on.
That's all right. I figured you were in the middle of.
Okay, breaking back into journalism during quarantine. Oh, there we go. Yeah, red and blue politics. You write something and one side agrees and just dismisses it, but neither one of them are going to hear it. Frankly, my answer on that is really about focusing on issues. I don't know, man. It's hard. I'm going pretty hard on the jugular for defunding the police. But the trick is to frame it in a way that will appeal to the majority. So the comic that's coming out next week is about Blue Lives Matter. We want to have a Blue Lives Matter. There are humans in my community that would like to paint Blue Lives Matter on the pavement in front of City Hall, because we did that with Black Lives Matter, and it's blatantly fair that that's how that works. So my first take on it was that I was going to do a comic about how there's no such thing as a blue life. And although that would be extremely cathartic for me, I don't think it would actually be helpful for bringing in conversation. So what I've ended up doing is reframing it to show that it's better for the police also to not have to do everything. We have a local politician who keeps referring to our current police system as being the Swiss Army knife, and that isn't actually helpful. And so just pointing out to people that if we do this, then it will be better for both the police and for members of our BIPOC community. I don't know. I think that if you're trying to do something that is difficult like that, just focusing on the issues of something always helps. It always makes things, if you're able to break things down into what the facts are, it makes it easier. And I realize that that's me coming from an extremely liberal county and an extremely liberal state. But that has been my experience, is that when I'm able to listen to what the genuine fears are from the other side and break it down and answer it with compassion, then I'm able to get people to listen to me a little bit. But we'll see. I think there's probably a good chance that going this direction could get my paper sued. And that's another thing that is nice about working for a newspaper, is that the paper will be sued and I will not. But that's most help I have. Okay, so experience in journalism, but you're rusty, breaking back in during quarantine. Pitch to everybody. I mean, I just look for anybody who has any kind of open call things. Reach out to newspapers that don't have a comic and offer to do them for $5. Like, do you want a comic every week? I'll do it for $5. I mean, maybe don't lowball yourself quite that much, but like just go ahead and offer. The other chunk of it, the thing that actually makes me money, is pitching to newsletters. So I work with a couple of rural newsletters and I do their comic for them. That allows me to kind of explain really cool things that are going on in the community and really cool. So I just finished a project working for a forester who was basically, she's taking down a whole bunch of trees in a county park and was really afraid of people getting upset that she was cutting down trees, which is fair. Trees are wonderful. But the whole deal with it was cutting down trees opened up a lot more daylight for some of the underbrush, and the wood from those trees was going to some local mills, and the local mills were delivering them to some local carpenters, and they were building benches that were going to go back into the park. Really awesome, really exciting, and really easy to get passionate about, because it's something that's just super cool. And doing that has been much more profitable and much easier to break into. Going after little areas where people don't expect to see comics seems to be the best spot to go for it. And right now, focusing local and focusing on people who are doing cool and interesting things seems to be a much better way to go. Okay, and I don't know if anybody else has questions, but that's pretty much what I've got.
Anyone else? Okay. I think that's anything else that you wanted to cover, or are we
No, we could be done and everybody can have lunch early. Gosh.
Oh, okay.
No, that's all I have with it. Yeah, it's I mean, I don't know. Are you guys people that are drawers or creators or?
I don't know.
Well, I can talk first.
Yeah.
I'm Jilly. I originally grew up in the Twin Cities area, and I was in the military for a bit, and then my folks, they retired in northern Iowa, so I'm hanging out there now. I've been trying to get back to the Twin Cities, but this quarantine and all this stuff. But anyway, I joined a group up in the Twin Cities, so I'm not really that far from there, called Fan Minitastic, and we've been really just going to town during quarantine, communicating through was it Slack and well, anyway, we've been communicating online. We've been making tons of zines and stuff. There's definitely individuals that are really. I was surprised that Cam didn't come. She's really into political comments and stuff, comics and stuff. I I admit I really listen a lot and I read a lot of political stuff. Like I obsessively listen to NPR, the local public radio up there, and so I'm really into it. But at the same time, like I feel like a bit too nervous myself, really making like literal political comics. I have been working on a project this year where I was writing political satire, which was disguised as a fantasy comic, about this year. But, so it's more like hidden stuff. And it's so funny too. I have friends that lean more red and they read it and they're not really getting, they don't really see it all. And so I find it kind of funny.
Oh, it's always fun when you can hide something in somewhere else. So I wish I was a little better at that. I'm too straight and to the point with stuff. Okay, that's super cool. So Sarah Merck I don't know if you find this interesting at all, but Sarah Merck just put out a big anthology of, she was talking to women who have been guards in Guantanamo, and she just put out a book that's a compilation of their stories that are comics. And like that real true story, true to life, just presenting things the way they are is super cool.
Oh yeah, I actually one of my drill they're not drill sergeants in the Navy, but she was actually stationed there. They actually make them change their names and everything. It was very interesting what she told me about that kind of.
God, I would read your political comics. I want to know, what it's like to be in so many different weird circles of things. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think my biggest fear is I am more, what do they call it? I like to see things from both sides. Mm-hmm. I'm more Green Party myself, like, on the political spectrum. So I'm definitely blue, but I have family and friends that are red, and I like to listen to what they like to say, and I can always just say, if they're way too serious and getting way too hot and heavy, I just say, let's agree to disagree and let's change the subject. But, like, I at least try to give an ear for a little bit, which can be really hard. And so I think if I were to write comics and stuff, I kind of would do a little bit on both sides just to kind of play, because I just sometimes things, some things on TV and stuff, sometimes they're so one side and then so another side. And it's so weird too when I'm still in the reserves, like when I go on trainings and stuff, and like about a good 70% are the people working there are people of color. And it's just so different when you work with people and you get to hear all the things. And it's different when you just hear about it all on TV, but you don't actually spend time actually talking with people, getting their perspectives, what do they call it, the word from the street.
Yeah, and I've always found that when I'm creating comics, it is always best to present neutrally, as neutrally as I can. To me, that looks in a certain way, and I know that I've definitely made people extremely angry, that I didn't intend to make angry, and that's okay. For me, I'm not somebody who's terribly sensitive, so it doesn't bother me when I make people mad. But it is like when I can present something both visually and to the point where they're able to understand simply what's important, and what's important, you know, blue, red, whatever. What's important is always for me coming from a civil and human rights and environmental rights place. So what is good for humanity, what is good for the environment, what is good for our community. And you know, once again, I'm almost always focusing on small local issues as a microcosm of bigger issues. So I'm very aware that we're having big national conversations around defunding the police and around what global warming and things look like. But I'm interested in my community, and I'm interested in knowing that at any moment, and reminding myself that at any moment, I have an unusual name, we're not a big population, and there's not very many people in my county that are under 60. And so it's very easy to pick me out from a crowd. So being fully aware that the thing that I'm creating could very easily put a target on my back, and I want to be proud of what I am saying for its reasonableness as well as for its astuteness. And that's the line to walk for me, is that. And I really admire, so the artists that I feel like do a really great job of taking things that are very left, very difficult, are people like Seth Bachman, or just put out a new book recently. Anyways, so are people who have a background in documentary making or in nonfiction or in journalism, and are able to cross lines and tell stories. Telling stories is the most essential thing for me. And if I have to cross political lines one way or the other to be able to tell stories, then I absolutely will. But it's figuring out a way of what to do and how to do it responsibly, and how to do it to where I don't give somebody who doesn't agree with me that like red film of rage across their face and they can't understand what I'm saying. I'm not always successful with that, but I do really try. I do really try for that. Great. Yeah. Cool. Well, if that's comments and things, I'm happy to, yeah, end there.
Do you have like anything you want to add as far as like getting in touch with you, website? I mean, we have that on the website, but if you want to add anything, feel free.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram a lot. Part of my day job is I do social media management for another artist, so I'm always on there. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'd be really happy to do that. And I always put my Nat Attack comics up from the newspaper a couple days after. But that's what I have.
All right, cool. All right, anybody else? Any other questions? All right, I think that's it. All right, thanks a bunch.
Awesome, thank you so much for having this happen. Yeah, it's the first online class I've ever done.
Oh, okay, cool, awesome. All right, well, have a good afternoon.
You
Bye,
too.
everyone.
Take care, everyone. Bye.